Welcome to Design More, Despair Less. Today, I'm going to be going through what a gap analysis is and how you can use that to improve your products as well as improve your business. Before I get into that, make sure you subscribe to Design More, Despair Less and follow on social media. Links are in the show notes. So, a gap analysis is a term that you may have heard of. It's something that I've been hearing here and there throughout my time working for different companies. It's something that I've read about in books. Actually, just read about it in a book called The Universal Methods of Design. Right here, if you're watching the video, you can see what that book looks like. So a gap analysis is a great method you can use to not only improve your product design, but also just improve your business in general. So I'm going to go through an example of designing a camping trowel. So for those of you who have been listening for a while, you'll know that I worked with a company a year or so ago, a couple of years ago now, designing some camping trowels and trying to improve upon the current products available out there within the camping world. And there's a lot of them. It was definitely a difficult market to break into, but I think it will serve as a really good example of how to do a good gap analysis. So real quick, high level, in a gap analysis, you're looking at six main steps or stages. The first one is you need to define your current state. So just defining the current state of the market, or in the case of a business, the current state of your business. How are things going? And then next you need to look at, okay, what's the desired state? Where you've defined where you're at. Now you want to look at where you're going. So that's your desired state. And then between those two, if there's a problem, right, or you're not where you want to be, there's going to be a gap. And so the next step is to do this gap analysis and figure out, okay, what are all the gaps that are preventing us from getting to the desired state? At that point, you then look at analyzing the impacts of those gaps. Then you look to developing a solution based on which impact is more impactful, which impacts you think you can actually address. And then the last step is you implement your solutions and then you monitor the situation, potentially with some KPIs, key performance indicators, something like that, to see how you're progressing from your current state to your desired state. So going back to this camping trowel, I want to run through each one of these and kind of talk through how you would implement this. So the first one is defining the current state. So in the case of the camping trowel, the current state would be all of the products out there in the market and what people like about those, what people don't like about the current product offering, and what you could do or what they think people could do to make it better. So for example, a lot of camping trowels are cheap. Maybe they are plastic, they break easily. If you're trying to pry out a rock or a root, if it's plastic, you might snap it in half. Okay, if it's plastic, it sounds counterintuitive, but if it's a stronger / cheaper plastic, it might be heavy. Maybe they've just made it really thick and kind of over designed for something plastic, but they're trying to fit this niche of cheap, but also somewhat durable, but really it's not hitting either one. Another complaint people would have is sometimes these trowels, when people try to make it out of a thin sheet metal, it ends up being really flexible and has a lot of flex to it, especially in torsion, right? If you twist it at all, it's going to flex and not be all that easy to use. That is definitely one of the complaints or a common complaint for these thin sheet metal camping trowels, which are very light, obviously, but they may not be serving that need of something that feels sturdy and feels useful. It feels like you hit a rock or you're really putting a lot of force on, it's just going to twist and bend. and not be a great user experience. Another complaint people have, which is a little bit different from the actual user experience, but is that so many of these are made in China, made in foreign countries, and a lot of the time people, they would like to support stuff being made in their country. So in the US, that's made in America. A lot of people would like to support companies like that and pay their hard-earned cash to companies that are paying people fair wages, are providing jobs for people in their country. And so a lot of the less expensive camping trowels almost always are made somewhere else. And so that is another niche in the market that could be filled. One other complaint that was seen is the trowels that meet this criteria of being lightweight, durable, made in the USA are very expensive. So that's kind of defining the current state. You can do this by, for example, with the camping trowels, a lot of that market research was done going on Amazon or these other websites that were selling this equipment, reading through reviews, also buying some of those products, doing some of our own product testing, and just getting a feel for the current market. Step 2 is figuring out, okay, what's the desired state? Where do we want this camping trowel to end up? What product do we want to end up offering? And so we came to the conclusion for this particular product that we wanted it to be metal, especially when you're first starting off. Manufacturing stuff out of sheet metal, something like that, is much more cost-friendly. You don't have to pay for an entire mold if you're going to be making it out of something like plastic, which can be a lot of upfront cost. So we wanted to be metal, we wanted to be lightweight. So we went to titanium. We wanted it to be made in the USA. And so that we could hit that niche, that part of the market that was looking for products made in the USA. And then we also wanted it to be cost effective and not be an exorbitant cost to the customer. So that's a pretty tough set of requirements to hit, but that was the desired state. So the next step was identifying gaps. Okay, so we know the current market, we know this desired state where we believe the market would like products to go and where we would like to offer a product. So what's the gap from getting from where we're at to getting there? The first step was understanding the capabilities of sheet metal design, which was my job as the engineer on the project. So right there's just a little bit of knowledge gap, just understanding what's possible, how to design parts for sheet metal, especially out of materials like titanium, which I didn't have a lot of experience with. Some of the other gaps were the skill gap. Okay, now we know we want to make it a sheet metal, we want to make it out of titanium. We didn't have the skill necessarily ourselves to do that, or the equipment, which you could consider an environmental gap. In our environment, we didn't have these manufacturing equipment. So we had to find that somewhere else. So there was a bit of a gap there as far as the equipment we had. There was a skill gap as far as we needed to be able to find a skilled manufacturer who was capable of making this within the tolerances we needed, using the materials we needed, but also not being crazy expensive. So there's a difficult gap there. And then we also had a little bit of a communication gap that we had to understand between us and our customers. How do we communicate to the customers all of the benefits of this product? How do we communicate to them that it is designed in the USA, manufactured in the USA, and that it's going to deliver on robustness, durability, and strength for when they're using this camping trowel? And so that's just going through kind of a set of just identifying these different gaps. And broader than what I even mentioned, There's a lot of other gaps, which I will get into here in a minute. I want to dive into those in a bit more detail. But going along with this trial example, the next step is analyzing the impact of each of these gaps. And by far the biggest one was just being able to manufacture this at a cost-effective price. Anytime you're manufacturing in the USA, and in this case, manufacturing at low quantities, because we could only afford to manufacture so many at a time, that gap as far as cost was very difficult. And so that was one that we wanted to go after first. And that mainly came down to putting out a lot of quotes and trying to find vendors who fit well with us. And so that was part of the solution, which was finding a vendor who could provide what we needed and provide it for a cost that we could actually afford. And then the next step is you implement and monitor it. So then we went forward with the specific manufacturer who could hit our price point as well as deliver the quality that we wanted. And we got an initial quote, ordered a batch of parts. Prices tended to change a little bit after that. And so that's kind of part of that monitoring, looking at what you're selling it for, what's your profit margin, and all of those sorts of things. So in this case of this camping trowel, the product itself never quite took off. I think it was still a bit expensive for what the customers were looking for, and trying to find the right manufacturer at our quantities in the United States ended up being pretty difficult. But that's a good example of just kind of working through this whole process, defining your current state, going through your desired, figuring out what your desired state is, where do you want to get to, identifying the gaps between the two, and then analyzing the impact of each one of those gaps to determine which one you want to go after, develop a solution for it, implement that solution, and then monitor. But as I mentioned earlier, when you're identifying these gaps, there's a few different ones you can look at. There's probably a very wide set of gaps that you could come up with. But a good place to start is looking at, number one, knowledge gaps. So knowledge gaps could just be, in this example, the knowledge gap could be just the design engineer, the engineering team. I was like, well, I don't necessarily know how to create this product. I don't know how to design stuff out of titanium, let alone titanium sheet metal. And so that's something that has to be addressed. A skill gap could be the skill of your manufacturer. Maybe they don't have the skills to produce what you need. Could be the skill, again, of the design team to be able to design the parts that can hit the desired requirements. They can have the strength, robustness, that torsional strength, since that was one of the issues with the current state of the camping trowels. Knowledge gap could also be on the marketing side. Maybe they just aren't quite sure how to market this product appropriately. So then there's, as I said, knowledge gap, skill gap. Next is the motivation/attitude gap. This one, in this case, is probably a bit more difficult as far as obviously the motivation on the team was to design great products and then to sell those and have good revenue, keep the company humming along, and being able to design even more cool, fun, useful products. But for example, if we were going through a gap analysis just within a company, in general, motivation/attitude might be something that is really important. If you are having trouble releasing products on time, if you're having trouble selling products, that can kind of filter down to the rest of the company and cause some motivation issues. People are like, well, we keep trying, but we keep failing. These products aren't working. We're not profitable. That could really start to have a toll on the motivation of the team as well as on the overall attitude. The next one is environmental gaps. And so an environmental gap is kind of like, what's around you? What equipment do you have? This could be the computers you have. This could be the software that you have available to use. Things like that. Do you have the tools necessary to succeed? And so this can apply at the business level, kind of more broadly, it can apply for a very specific product that you're looking at, very specific product design. If you're having to laser mark parts, but you don't have a way to actually laser mark them in-house, then that could be a gap, and you have to figure out a solution, which might be outsourcing, might be purchasing a laser and doing that yourself. Finally, communication gaps. This could be a gap between how the marketing team is communicating what a product offers to the market. It could also be communication gaps within a company, within a business, and maybe that's a lack of communication from the leadership team down to the rest of the engineers, the technicians, and so on and so forth. It could be a lack of communication between the sales team, where maybe they are selling something or promising something that the engineering team can't actually hit, or doesn't have the time or equipment, or perhaps doesn't have the right software, which would go back to an environmental gap. So it could just be a lack of communication. You hear of this idea of siloing, where different departments within a company don't communicate well between each other. They kind of form these silos. So again, just to run through those 5 primary types of gaps that you will want to think through as you're doing this gap analysis. It's the knowledge gaps, skill gaps, motivation/attitude gaps, the environmental gap, the environment in which you are working in, what do you have, what don't you have, and then communication gaps. What other teams or people are you communicating with, and where is communication either not happening or not happening very well? So again, that is a gap analysis. It's pretty quick and a pretty high level explanation of a gap analysis, but it's a really useful tool. It's something that just kind of gives you a framework for looking at, instead of just having like a goal, it's kind of a way to replace that with, okay, here's our current state and here's our desired state. Understand where you're at, and then you really need to understand where you want to go. And there's just some very useful and detailed things that you can look at when you're going through this when you're going through this gap analysis, such as looking at all of your different knowledge gaps, skill gaps, motivation gaps, these different types of gaps that you need to identify and compare where you're currently at and how that gap could be closed to get to where you want to go. So for this Monday, I wanted to give a design tool / a design method, and that's why we went through a gap analysis. I'm going to try to get back on this cadence of doing Design More Mondays, which is just talking about something related to design specifically, usually a skill, a tool, or a way of approaching product design that I think will be useful. And then on Fridays, I want to do Fail More Fridays. And so on Fridays, I'm going to talk about failure. This could be failures that I've gone through, failures that other important historical people have gone through, and how those failures have actually pushed them forward and pushed them to create more than they ever thought was possible, and perhaps more than what anyone thought was possible. So that's kind of the cadence. Also on the YouTube channel, I will be putting out other tutorials, going through some CAD designs, going through different websites, and just trying to get information out there to help people design more, help people have the tools they need to create awesome things, and the confidence to just go for it, to create things, to make things, to try to make a real positive impact on the world. That at the end of the day, that's the goal of this, just trying to provide knowledge as well as provide inspiration and motivation, and just help people think through design at a practical level, but then at a higher level with understanding what's the meaning, what's the purpose. Is any of this stuff actually worth doing? Is it worth struggling over? Is it worth pouring your blood, sweat, and tears into? And if you're working towards something that's meaningful and has a purpose and will benefit the world, then I think the answer to that is definitely yes. So that is this episode of Design more, despair less. As always, please like, share, subscribe, all of the things to support this podcast. And I will leave it there. Remember, design more and despair less. Thank you for watching.